into another edition of Valpo Sports Night. I'm Drew Taylor. Joining me today is Chris Kleinon-Schultz, sports director at WVUR-FM, as well as Molly Smirka, who's a sports beat writer for The Torch. Guys, let's jump into some Valpo topics here. The volleyball team is starting a stretch of 10 Horizon League matches in a row. How do you think they'll fare over that stretch?
This is a stretch that Valpo could do fairly well in. They've had very tough non-conference contests to really open them up for the season. They lost a couple times to teams like Ohio State, which is continuously ranked in the top 25, and Kansas, which is, right at the doorstep to getting right in. They're going to have a tough stretch in October, though, with Butler, Milwaukee, and Cleveland State, teams that Valpo has struggled against historically. But if they could get through that, use their matchups ahead of that time to really step in, this could be a very good time for Valpo to really set themselves ahead of the pack in the Horizon League.
And I'm going to agree with you. They have six of those 10 games at home, and they generally play pretty well at home. So I think as long as they can get a couple wins at the beginning, they'll finish over 500 for those 10 games that they have to play.
And did you like the non-conference schedule they played? Do you think they got them ready for the Horizon League season?
I really think they did. Even with the losses, again, they had some tough teams that they were going against. Ohio State and Ball State swept them, and those are very good teams year in and year out. And they took Kansas to 5 sets, and it took career highs in kills for their top 3 attackers just for the Jayhawks to slide by them. That and through this non-conference schedule, what Karen Avery's really like to do is mix up those lineups, get an idea of how some of these younger players fit in. And so for the most part, this is a very balanced team overall. They've proven that they have a lot of weapons, and now it's just the question of transitioning it into conference play.
Something worth mentioning is Morgan Bile last week was the Horizon League Offensive Player of the Week. She's just been a beast early on in her freshman campaign. And
it's not just the offense for her. She's also become one of the big components of the Crusader block up front. Yep. And again, with the balance, you could say that about so many different people, but Bile as a freshman, just a few weeks into her college career, the way that she's stepping up, that is absolutely huge for this team, especially after losing a couple of very talented middles like Tara Diebler and Katie Lehman the year before.
And I think as long as Morgan Bile can stay on her good track and get a couple good plays, she'll be the key to them being successful on this 10-game trip.
Absolutely, guys. Let's switch gears a little bit to the Crusader football team. They begin their conference schedule on October 1st. Happens to also be homecoming. Where do you see the Crusader victory, if at all, through this stretch?
I think when you look at this schedule, especially because of how the seasons have been going for Valpo football, the next coming games are probably their best opportunities to pick up a win, and especially when you just compare the teams head-to-head. Morehead State coming up on homecoming is probably the best chance that they have. It's a team that Valpo's been very competitive with over the last couple of years. There will be that homecoming environment, about 3,000 to 4,000 fans over at Brownfield. And the big positive for Valpo is that they get that bye week heading in. Yeah. Meanwhile, Morehead State is a tough contest against San Diego. So, I mean, when you look at everything else, there isn't really that circle win on the schedule, but if there's anywhere that would probably be closest, it would be that contest on homecoming with the Morehead State Eagles.
And I'm going to agree with you with that too. They play really well over homecoming, and I think that this will be their best chance to win because they have two away games against 2 of the lesser teams in the conference, and they could possibly win at those 2 games. But I think their best chance will be playing at home over homecoming.
Frustrating thing for me is if Valpo wins that first game at home, they obviously ran it. They were up by 14 at some points in that game. If they win that game, who knows what they're doing right now? Maybe they don't get dominated their last two games, and who knows what that will take them. But I think it'll be interesting to see if the football team gets a couple wins here this year. Guys, let's switch now to the men's basketball team. They released their schedule for the upcoming season. Talk about their non-conference games, because obviously we know you play the conference schedule, play 2 games each, 1 home, 1 away. But I want to hear your thoughts on the non-conference schedule.
Well, it's very interesting the way that men's basketball is set up, especially as opposed to women's basketball, because you get a little bit of conference mixed in there at the end. There's already an early contest with Butler coming up in December, but without knowing all the teams that Valpo's playing with this 2K Sports Classic, you already know that you start off with Arizona, you have Ohio State a little further down the road, as well as some competitive teams that they played the previous year, like IPFW and Oakland. Oakland, they had a 103-102 win against them last year. That could be a very exciting contest. And if I remember right, it's actually on campus at the Arc. So there's some big games coming up and some great opportunities, especially heading into that Thanksgiving break when the Classic heads to Valpo for an opportunity not only to see how well this team can play, but visibly as fans to be able to come out and support the club.
Yeah, I think so too, and especially scheduling games against bigger teams like Arizona and Ohio State, it'll help them prepare for the rest of the conference season and perhaps into the NCAA tournament. It's good for the team to get that experience playing against high-profile teams.
I'm really looking forward to that Arizona game. It's going to be televised on ESPNU. It'll be a good testing point of where this Crusader team is and where they've come in the offseason, and really just to see what Bryce Drew can do as a coach.
You have Bryce Drew jumping in as a head coach, and you got a lot of fairly new guys that will be jumping in the spots. I mean, you could look at newcomers like Richie Edwards and that whole incoming group and see how well they could do, but there's also some good players from last year's team lost, most notably Brandon Wood and Corey Johnson, and the question is how you fill those spots, and especially for me, the big question is where are the big men going to come for this Valpo team? True. Kevin Van Vyk is a really good player down low, but he has back issues. Problems. He can't play 40 minutes every single game. He could probably get you 20, 25 at best. You need a strong bench behind him. You don't have Cam Witt anymore. And, you know, Orvoje Vucic really hasn't stepped up very well in just the limited time that he has. That's the biggest question mark, I think, heading in. And when you have a lot of these tough teams that you have to go against, it can make things very difficult on a team and their confidence, but those are going to be the best opportunities to see how well Valpo can stack up, especially because they want to get back in that tournament.
It'll be interesting to see how a lot of the younger players will respond to playing bigger teams and seeing how well they can build on perhaps confidence that they can get playing all those bigger teams.
Always seems to be the issue, though. Valpo always has pretty good guard play for the most part. The big men have always been a problem. Even Corey Johnson last year, great hustle player down low, but he wasn't that prototypical big man that could bang down low in the post and, you know, beat up some of the bigger guys in the conference. But we're going to take a quick timeout. After this quick break, we're going to talk about the Bills and the Lions, actually, as well as the Pac-12. You're watching Valpo Sports Night. Stay tuned.
I'm Brandon Spinner, and I'm on VUTV.
I'm Chris Quanon-Schultz, and I'm on VUTV.
We're Bacchus Gamma, and we're on VUTV.
Welcome back into Valpo Sports Night. I'm Drew Taylor, again joined by Chris Quanon-Schultz, sports director at WVOR-FM, and Molly Smirka, who's a sports beat writer for The Torch. Guys, I said we were going to talk about the Bills and the Lions, so let's do so. They started off 2-0 on the year, Detroit in dominating fashion as well. Is this an early season fluke or a sign of the changing of the guard in the NFL?
Is it okay for me to say that neither is the answer?
Yeah, go ahead.
Now, I don't believe that it's necessarily a fluke. When you look at the teams they were playing, I mean, both of them had to face Kansas City, which really is making more of an impact on the injury news than they could possibly do on the scoreboard at this point. I'm not ready to say it's a changing of the guard, but, I mean, you can't necessarily throw these teams out either. They were able to take care of business in 2 games where they shouldn't. The Bills had a great comeback effort against the Raiders. This Lions team is built pretty well with Matthew Stafford at the helm, a young but confident quarterback, and this Bills team is pretty good all around. So even with the divisions they're in, maybe it's not going to be a change into the guard per se, but I think you could say that after the start they've had, that you could throw them into the mix.
I'm going to say you have to wait until next week. Or this coming week, because the Lions, they have to travel to Minnesota to play indoors, and anywhere playing on the road is hard. And Buffalo has to host New England, who they haven't won or who they haven't beat in 16 tries. So I think depending on how they do this coming week, that will decide if these teams are for real or not.
The weird thing for me is that the Bills trade Lee Evans before the season. That almost seemed like throwing the white flag out to me. Like it seemed like they were just rebuilding and moving on forward. They weren't going to win for another few years, but it seems like they're going to win. They've obviously won the first 2 games, and the Patriots will be a tough test. But talk about also the quarterback play of Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, Fitzpatrick's made a very nice impact thus far. I mean, and you look at the entire roster of this team, I mean, they got some good athletes like C.J. Spiller as well, but they just don't stand out in the way, especially that other teams, let alone in their own division, would. I mean, forget the entire AFC. That's just a very tough division for them to be in and try to compete in. But they found a way through these first couple matchups to win. And, you know, I have to agree with Molly on this, that these third contests of the year for both of these teams, that's going to say a lot about where they are and where their season is going to go. And for the Bills, having to face New England is going to be kind of tough. This Lions team, the way they're built on both sides of the ball, I mean, they could make a good contest against a Vikings team, which is somewhat rebuilding on their own end. But no matter what the outcome is, it'll certainly be fun to watch.
All right, let's switch gears now to the college ranks, more specifically the Pac-12. They've decided to stay with 12 teams, which comes to a bit of a surprise to me. Is it smart for the conference? It seems to me that they're going to lose a lot of money.
Well, the teams themselves, the schools themselves in this, they kind of like, at least at the moment, of trying to solidify this Pac-12 the way it is. Because when people are starting to talk about this Pac-16 or, I don't know, Pac-128 as far as it could go, people were talking about this pod system that they were going to develop, but they didn't like how the pods are going to end up with the kind of teams they were thinking to put in. You're talking, you know, these Big 12 teams from like Texas and Oklahoma, and the way they were going to separate them was likely to have all these kind of more inward teams closer to the Midwest be all together, and then just leave the real true Pacific teams on their own end. You really don't create any new rivalries in that. It's a lot of the same business, but all of a sudden you just have a different conference name to it. There's something with how they're trying to shape things that they still want to work out, and they wanted to jump up that where immediately they were going to see a little bit of issues with that.
I think it's good for the Pac-12 to stay 12 teams because I think the whole college football conference realignment thing is damaging to football and also to other college sports. So I think it's good that they're trying to stay with 12 teams, and I think for the Big 12, what they're going to have to try and do is make sure that Texas A&M, Texas, and Oklahoma don't try and leave the conference to go to other places. So I think then the Big 12 will be over.
There was a lot of speculation with potentially Big 12 teams moving to the Pac-12 or whatever, the Pac conference, we'll say, because it was looking like it was going to expand. Now that the Pac-12 is staying with 12 teams, what are the odds that the Big 12 stays alive? Because I know there's a lot of other reasons why it was on the potential demise anyways.
I look at it this way. I think the Big 12 days are numbered. I don't know exactly when the death knell is going to be, but it almost looks like it's going to happen because you have teams moving in and out, left and right. People are going everywhere. And a lot of people were speculating that maybe if it got down to enough teams, that maybe half would go to the Pac conference and the other might end up in the Big 10. It works in a way for a lot of these teams, just given where they're at. It wouldn't be the worst moves of all, but at least for the moment with the Pac-12 staying the way it is, there's a little bit of stability and a little bit of time for them maybe to save themselves. But just with all the movement that's going on right now and all the money that could be made by going somewhere else now that their stock is down, it's not a question of if but when for me.
I think it'll stay the Big 12 at least for a couple more seasons. I think right now that the Big 12 needs to make sure that Texas A&M, Oklahoma, and Texas stay in the conference. And once they leave, then the Big 12 won't be able to be a conference anymore, and other teams will just either have to find a new conference or else maybe pull in other teams from a smaller conference to maybe perhaps make a new Big 12.
I think the Big 12 catered a little bit too much to the Texas Longhorns. I mean, looking at things like they were going to create the Longhorn Network, things like that, separating them basically from any other teams of the Big 12, I think some of the other teams just got flat out jealous and, they were treated like unfairly in their minds.
Well, Texas really is the money team of that conference. A really kind of a money team for that entire area of the country. I mean, they're kind of responding similar to the way the Yankees probably would.
Sure.
Their own sports network, and they're good in so many different sports. They're continually looked at as a football and baseball power, and they have a fairly good basketball team nearly every year. So, I mean, there's a way you almost kind of have to cater to the big guy, but when everyone else feels slighted by it, that's going to cause some bad feelings and possibly some moves.
All right, we're going to take one more timeout. When we come back, we'll talk about the Rays' chances to catch the Red Sox in the wild card race. You're watching Valpo Sports Night. Stay tuned.
We're VooVox and we're on VUTV. We're Sigma Phi Epsilon and we're on VUTV.
We're Air Force ROTC and we're on VUTV.
I'm Rachel Batista and I'm on VUTV.
I'm Mike Targonski and I'm on VUTV.
I'm Lisa Meadows and I'm on VUTV.
We're the Career Center and we're on VUTV.
Welcome back to Valpo Sports Night for our last topic of the day. Chris and Molly, let's talk about the Rays and the Red Sox. Red Sox had a 9.5 game lead in September. The Rays are now hot on their heels. What are the odds they catch them and make it to the postseason?
Before I go into it, I have to just comment, when I was here a couple of weeks ago, I mean, Mike Targonski and I were talking about it, and we were acted shocked if anything would change in the race. Well, look at where we're at now. All of a sudden, the Rays are becoming a factor. I'll also we're talking about the Rays and Red Sox because they're in the same division, but the Angels actually still have a chance to get into this race as well. Both of these teams are just a couple back of the Red Sox who have really been faltering, and I'd say they have a chance to both make it in. Given the teams they're playing, I mean, the Rays and the Red Sox both have to face the Yankees. The Rays aren't going to have it very easy at the end despite a lot of home games, and the Angels have to go against the Texas Rangers at one point too, so it'll be very difficult for all the teams. And even the Red Sox, as bad as they are, I think they still have a chance to pull through. Even if it's just by the skin of their teeth, I think they could do it.
I'm going to say that the Rays might have a chance to catch them because they have their last 6 games at home and the Red Sox are on the road. So I think playing at home is really important, and especially since they do have to play the Yankees, that they might bring out, or they might have the edge over the Red Sox.
I still have no idea how the Red Sox are going to come up with enough pitching. They've had injuries. They've had pitchers not performing up to what they were supposed to do. I mean, I just don't see it.
Well, Dice K has been one of the biggest busts of the past decade. He's not even around because he's injured. You know, Cub cast-off Rich Hill isn't available. And Clay Buchholz, there's a chance he could be back, but there's serious doubts about whether or not he'll actually be put into a position to pitch either the final week of the regular season or the playoffs if they get there. And while it's very tough, the Red Sox have always been a fairly deep team. Either through getting trades or just having a lot of people on their bench, there's always people that they can have to step up. And they still have a pretty decent-looking 9-man club and a fairly nice rotation, even with all the injuries. It's just the question of whether or not they can perform. They started the season on such a weak note. If they end the season on a weak note, they'll miss the playoffs, or one of the few times that they've done so in quite a while.
Are we all in agreement, though, that even if the Red Sox do make the playoffs out first or second round, they're not making it to the World Series?
No.
Absolutely
No?
not.
Okay.
Not a chance.
Well, that'll wrap things up. I'm Drew Taylor. I want to thank my guest, Chris Kleinhahn-Schultz, sports director at WVUR, Molly Smirka, sports beat writer for The Torch, and I want to thank you for watching. Stay tuned for next week's edition of Valpo Sports Night.